Welcome to the TCM Teach Podcast, business podcast designed exclusively for acupuncturists and Chinese medicine herbalists who are ready to build thriving, sustainable businesses. I'm Sabey Smith, licensed acupuncturist, herbalist, professor, coach, entrepreneur, and I've spent years helping practitioners like you not only master their clinical skills, but also create strong, legally protected practices that allow you to focus on healing with confidence. Today, we're diving into a topic that, sure, may not always feel exciting, but I'm going to do my best to make it that way. But it's absolutely essential for a clinic: consent forms, policies, and protecting your practice legally. The truth is, one misstep, whether it's an unclear policy, missing a consent form, or a communication gap, could put your clinic, patients, and livelihood at risk if you're not prepared. So, of course, I'm going to give you a disclaimer on this one. So please remember, I'm simply a practitioner here to support you on your journey. The information shared in this podcast is intended for educational purposes only, and it should not be taken as professional, legal, or financial advice. So for guidance specific to your practice, consult an attorney or licensed professional familiar with healthcare law in your state and business law in your state. So without further ado, here we go. We're going to touch on some topics you've heard me speak about in previous episodes. However, we might be diving into a little more detail this time as we go through this episode. So if it feels like something is being repeated, it might be, but I have some other things to add to it this time as well. So why legal protection is going to matter in our clinic? Things we've talked about before. Patients place trust in us every visit, and legal safeguards are going to protect both them and us as practitioners. So we want to think of our policies and forms as the clinic's defensive weiqi. Again, making sure I reinforce this so you understand it from a TCM perspective. They prevent disputes, misunderstandings, and risk before they happen. We're being proactive here as we do in TCM. So having clear legal structures will give us peace of mind and professional credibility. So, essential consent forms every clinic should have. Now, you've heard me talk about some of these, but I want to make sure that these are understood. Treatment consent forms covers acupuncture, moxibustion, cupping, gua sha, and other modalities, for example, like tuina. This is going to explain the risks, the benefits, and the alternatives. Okay, so herbal and supplement consent form, that's the next one, that's number 2, clarifies the patient's understanding of ingredients, dosage, and potential side effects. This is going to help protect against liability from adverse reactions because they're signing off on all of this. Next, we have telehealth and virtual consultation consent. Again, this is all consent forms, okay? They're agreeing to this. They're signing off on this. This defines the limitations of virtual treatment and privacy protocols. What I would also add to that too would be something like what to expect. Hey, here's what a telehealth consult is. Here's our limitations, but here's what we're also going to accomplish. Maybe just nice to add in there. Photography and media release. So if you have someone coming in, you have to get consent, obviously, from the patient or whoever. And if using patient images for marketing, documentation, or educational purposes, of course they have to sign off on it. Otherwise, that's a violation. You don't want that to happen. So make sure that you're getting a photography and media release signed. HIPAA and privacy consent. We've talked about this, but confirms patient understands how their data will be stored and used. So again, just to reiterate, they are signing off on this. They are agreeing to the treatment consent. They are agreeing to the herb and supplement consent. They are agreeing to the telehealth and virtual consult consent. They are agreeing to the photography and media release, and they are agreeing to the HIPAA privacy consent. They are agreeing to these things. They are signing off on these. This is to protect you. To say, hey, I have a document that says they were okay with this. As long as you're not violating a law, as long as you're not saying, I'm going to violate HIPAA, and they signed off on it. See, don't do that. That's not good business practices. Just make sure they understand how you're protecting them. and that you have a vested interest in their well-being and privacy. Next, policies. Oh, yeah, policies. Cancellation and no-show policies. Ooh, this is a good one. This is always a hot topic when I'm teaching at the school as well, where we want to talk about protecting revenue here. And this is going to set patient expectations because, trust me, I learned this the hard way. So that's why I need to tell you this. If you give any leeway in your cancellation or no-show policy, it's not a good look, because then sometimes people like to take more and test your limits further and further. I had made that mistake and it did not go well. So there's a time and place for everything. If it's a patient who's seen you consistently for a year and they simply slipped up, do what you have to do, but make sure it's a fair policy. Sometimes it's $50 because you didn't show up, or, well, you already paid for it, so that's my money now. You decide to not show up. Be an understanding, compassionate practitioner, but really be a more serious business owner. They'll take you more seriously and they won't do it again. And if they get mad about it, it was their fault. They agreed to it. They signed off on it. So make a policy that's fair, understandable, and just stick to it. Trust me, just stick to the policy. Don't be afraid of enforcing it with fear that you're going to lose the patient. It's their fault. You don't want to deal with chasing people around for money or losing out on money because they didn't hold up their side of the bargain. Don't do it. Payment and refund policy clarifies payment methods, late fees, and refunds. You don't have to give refunds. You could totally charge late fees, and that you just make sure you have a clear method of payment. Cash or card, for example. For example, I actually told people, no, I don't accept checks because that could bounce. I don't want to have to chase it down. I don't want to deal with it. Cash or card, please. So just make sure it's clear. And then you could just say, no, I'm not going to give you a refund. There's no refunds on this. Unless you find the need to. It really depends on what the case is. Patient conduct policy. This is a good one to have. Not everybody has one of these, but this is important. This is going to define respectful behavior, limits, and boundaries. So this is something that the patient is going to sign off on. For example, if they are under the influence of something, you could say, I'm sorry, you signed off on the policy. I can't work with you today. Come in tomorrow. For example, if a patient comes in drunk or something, you shouldn't necessarily work with that, right? Because it's a bigger risk on you. So that could be a very sensitive topic to discuss with a patient, but you can also be professional about it. I'm not trying to point this out, but based on your behavior, and I don't feel like today is a good day. And maybe come from a compassionate standpoint. Are you feeling okay? What's going on? This isn't you. Let's talk about this. There's always a way to handle these things. Safety and sanitation policy protects patients and staff and aligns with OSHA and local health requirements. Share the safety and sanitation policy directly with the patients. That way they know you care about it. It's kind of important. Staff policies, if applicable, contracts, non-compete agreements, confidentiality clauses, and expectations. So this is something you could fall back on. This is something that will develop over time if you end up with certain problems with employees that were never expected. Then you're going to end up with the policy once the next hire comes on. So just do your best effort in creating your defenses ahead of time, having them sign off on it. If it's at work, at will work, obviously, but it doesn't mean that they can't acknowledge that they had training and things like that. And here's the expectations that I trained you on. Signing off on things like that, your policies. This is also where standard operating procedures really come into play. It's essentially part of what you're writing. So what are common mistakes that some clinics make? Using outdated or generic consent forms that don't reflect your practice, yes, they can be a little time consuming. There are ways that you can start with a template, but you really want to make it specific to your practice. Other mistakes, not revisiting policies annually as services, state laws, or insurance requirements can change, and they can change often. So always make sure that it's up to date. Assuming verbal agreements are sufficient. They're not. If you don't have written consent, you're really limiting your own protections. So get it in writing. Get it in writing. Get it in writing. And don't overlook staff training on policies and legal protocols, because that could end up being a problem for your whole business. And you don't want your business to be at risk because an employee messed up, especially if they didn't have training. So what are some practical steps that can protect your clinic now? You can review all consent forms and policies for completeness and compliance. Make sure they're up to date. You can consult a healthcare attorney to ensure forms meet state regulations. You can digitize forms for easy access and storage. You can implement clear patient communication around policies that is verbal and written. You can train staff to consistently enforce policies and obtain signed consent forms. And you can schedule annual audits to update forms, policies, and training as things change and as it's appropriate. So what would be the TCM lens on legal preparedness? Take a wild guess. Of course, I'm going to talk about Wei Qi. In TCM, strong Wei Qi protects the body from external threats. You've heard me say this in pretty much every episode in this whole section. Similarly, consent forms, policies, and legal documentation protect your clinic from disputes, liability, and operational risks. So when your legal foundation is strong, you can focus fully on patient care and business growth. We all like that, right? So what's the ripple effect of proper policies? Patient feels safer and more confident when they know the clinic is professional and prepared. The staff know their responsibilities, their boundaries, and that's going to reduce stress and reduce mistakes. And you as the practitioner/owner can gain the confidence to scale your practice knowing you're legally protected, which of course everybody's going to want. So I want to leave you with this. Consent forms and clinic policies, yes, they're not the most glamorous thing, but they're a backbone to a compliant business, a protected business. They are critical pillars of successful and sustainable practices. So just like maintaining our strong Wei Qi, where protecting our health is a top priority, a strong legal framework is going to safeguard our clinic, patients, and of course our professional reputation, which is everything. So I've created a resource called the Clinic Legal Safeguard Checklist, which walks you step by step through the essential consent forms and policies that every acupuncture and herbal practice should have. So you're going to find that obviously in the membership. And in our next episode, we'll be exploring how to sell herbal formulas legally online and in clinic. So kind of going off of things we talked about in the past. And if you're not an herbalist, still make sure you look at that for the product purposes, because when I talk about herbs, a lot of times I'm talking about products and things of that nature too. So make sure you pay attention to that. So until then, thanks for tuning into the TCM Teach Podcast, and we'll see you next time. 谢谢。